Public transport is becoming more expensive and commuters are spending more time travelling between work and home. A latest study conducted by the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, titled the Gauteng Household Travel Survey, found that far more than half of all households spend over 10% of their income on transport, and that is well above government's target. Researchers are now calling for cheaper public transport and for government to increase the existing network. Let's unpack the story for you now. Dr Mathetha Mokonyama, who is the Impact Area Manager for Transport Systems and Operations at the CSIR. He joins us now via our video link in Pretoria. Good morning, Dr Mokonyama. Thanks so much for your time and patience this morning on the AM report. So far more than 10% of income being spent by more than half of the Gauteng population on transport. That doesn't come as a surprise to us, does it?
Well, good morning, Michelle. Years ago, in 1996, thereabouts, when government was still drafting policy on transport, this was one of the policy targets to say by 2020 we will have households not spending no more than 10% of their disposable income on public transport. And it seems that we are going the other way. I mean, 5 years ago, it was 55% of households, spending more than 10%. And then recently, we measure that it has grown to 60% of households. So we are going the other way, essentially. So it doesn't come as a surprise for a number of reasons. I mean, part of it is that we're dependent a lot more on low-capacity public transport modes like minibus taxis, which per trip, per kilometer, they cost a lot more for households.
Yeah, and not least because so many people use more than one mode of transport. If they're catching a taxi and a train to get to work, or they're catching 2 or even 3 taxis to get to their places of work.
Well, that does happen. The proportion of individuals who would transfer from one mode to another, it is relatively small. But what we have seen, though, is that a lot more people would rather walk a longer distance to access the one mode, so that they reduce their total cost of travel, which of course you've seen in the time that it takes to access the first mode, which has increased significantly, and also which was quite surprising as well, the time it spends to get to the final destination, say from a train station or a bus stop, it has also increased. So more and more people are trying different strategies to just reduce the cost of travel.
Yeah, I want to come back to the point you've just made now, but the focus, or at least the top line of the study, is that almost 60% of Gauteng households spend more than 10% of their income on transport. What is that figure closer to? If it's more than 10%, how much money are we seeing people spend on transport in the province?
I mean, lower income households can spend even half of their income on households. I mean, we see other households spending even 80% of their income on public transport. So it ranges, given depending on the income. But what is worrying is the direction of change. Remember that what we're trying to do is to look at the direction of change and, of course, the magnitude of change. So both of these things are in the wrong direction. So more than ever, we need to take public transport service delivery very seriously. And we see the economic recovery plan beginning to say to fix the economy, public transport cannot be ignored. But it needs to go beyond just creating of jobs for building infrastructure, but improving the services so that it is easier for the low-income, poorer households to access opportunities.
No, absolutely. And Dr. Mokonyama, you were also talking to us about the fact that many people will choose to rather walk a long distance than to spend the money it might take to take a train or take a taxi for a certain amount of kilometers. Does the survey also go further, as the CSIR focusing on transport systems and operations, does it go further to talk about the kind of impact that has just on wellness, happiness of people who not only spend a vast amount of their incomes on transport, but they also spend a large amount of their time getting to work, whether it is getting up in the early hours of the morning, walking those long distances instead of paying the money it might take to take a taxi?
Yes, we do measure the level of satisfaction to some extent with the services. For taxis, for example, we begin to see a very interesting trend that says, public transport users are more and more dissatisfied about the frequency of taxis in the off-peak periods. Of course, they are also dissatisfied about the issues relating to safety, especially when accessing taxi services, walking long distances to access public transport services. For train, for buses, the issues are about availability between where they want to travel and where they want to go, but also the infrequent services that are there. For taxis as well, I mean, we're seeing a lot of people saying these services are too expensive. So we're seeing that emerging from the numbers.
I mean, it's fair to say that we are not where we were hoping to be in 2020 when it comes to the provision of a proper public transport infrastructure. If we just take a look at PRASA as one issue, a fraction of the trains that are operating here in Gauteng and in the Western Cape as well. So how do we now address this situation going forward?
Well, those tasks with delivering services need to be more outward looking and not inward looking. What we often find is that entities, municipalities, those tasked with this very huge task, they are inward looking. It's more about us and very little about the passengers. So we need to be more outward looking. The policies, the performance of the different individuals need to be on the basis of an outward-looking system. So the likes of PRASA, for example, you need to adopt service charters and be held accountable for those. Similarly with municipalities tasked with massive budgets to improve the lives of ordinary people, they need to be held accountable to that. It's not like the money is not there. Money is actually there. We've been pumping a lot of money into improving public transport services, but there's some kind of a friction between receiving that money and eventually putting it on the ground so that it improves the lives of ordinary people.
Well, I suppose inward looking because of the massive corruption we've seen at entities like PRASA, so that inward looking stance is perhaps necessary. But now, we're in 2020, we're in an awful state when it comes to our public transport system. And fair to say that many more years still to go for South Africans to have a reliable system that really caters to the needs of people who live still in far-flung areas away from the inner city.
Well, it doesn't have to take that long, actually. I think these things are doable, and we see it in other parts of the world, across the continent. You look at the...
We saw during the World Cup, Dr. Mokonyama, the ability to deliver in a very short space of time infrastructure that catered to the needs of those who needed to travel to and from stadiums, the people who would have visited us in 2010, pardon me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a decision away from really delivering. And we see it in some of the most impoverished countries. Look at Tanzania, for example. They've been able to really roll out very impressive infrastructure over the last few years, and the performance is world class. So there's no reason with the technical capacity that we have in the country to be where we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for bringing us in the picture there, giving us a sense of where we are at in terms of transport infrastructure in our country. That's Dr. Mathetha Mokonyama, who is with the CSIR. I don't think this comes as a shock to you either. More than 60% of Gauteng households spending more than 10% of their income on public transport.